Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with Zaina Xavier of Kinsta, a tech company that has 120 people employed across the globe. And this was a really interesting interview because we got to see behind the scenes what goes on within the HR department at a remote company. So she is the head of HR and remote at the organization. We talked about the entire hiring process from basically them deciding that they need to hire someone all the way to the point of going through the interview process, what they look for in candidates, how to qualify with different levels of jobs and experience levels. It was just an awesome interview to really see the other side of what goes on in the process. And this will be really helpful for any remote job seekers out there. The company Kinsta as well has a very, very high engagement rating at their organization, very high satisfaction rating from their employees, and they have 10 remote roles at the time of this interview that are open. So make sure to check out kinsta.com/careers to see what it is that they have open. And feel free to enjoy this interview and reach out to Zaina if you're ever interested in any roles that they offer. Hello, and welcome everyone to another edition of Remote Weekly Spotlight, the show that gives you a weekly inside look at people who make successful remote companies and also how to get a job at one. Today I'm here with Zaina Xavier of Kinsta, and she is the head of HR at the organization, lives in Lisbon, Portugal, and Kinsta actually employs people all over the world, about 120 employees in quite a few different locations. And Zaina, there's something about you I rarely, if not have ever seen, that I have to ask about. What is it like to have two names with the first letters representing the end of the alphabet?
I'm always called last for everything. Any school activity, anything like that, I'm always right at the bottom of the list, yeah. And Zaina Xavier, it sounds, when I met my husband, I said, we can never get married because Zaina Xavier sounds like a superhero or something. Like
It is.
Yeah.
So what's the origin of your name?
My father's Arabic, so that's where the Zaina comes from. My husband is Portuguese, but his father's Goan, so it's a Goan name, Xavier.
That's so interesting. Yeah. Have you met any other people with a name as unique as yours?
No, I haven't. I got teased a lot in school because I don't know. Well, probably you remember some time ago. Osama bin Laden's son or cousin or somebody was going out with someone called Zaina, and that was the only other Zaina I'd ever heard of. So I got teased so much at school because I was a Zaina. So, but no, apart from that, I've never met another Zaina. Lots of Zainabs, but no other Zainas.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly an interesting name and something that I had to bring up because I don't know if I've ever met anybody with the ZX initials. So very cool. We've got a lot of things to dive in today, and my audience is typically very interested in understanding how it is that they can be a competitive candidate for a remote position. And you seem like just the perfect person to talk to about this. So I'm curious to start how your experience in HR as a profession has impacted the way that you have searched for jobs in your life?
Yeah, so that's a great question because I began my career at KPMG, so a very sort of professional, traditional kind of environment. And that was just over 10 years ago when I got my first role in a technology company. So I was setting up their HR department for them from scratch. And that was a really exciting role because it was 2009, middle of the financial crisis. I thought it would take me ages to get a job. And I just saw this role on their website and I applied directly and got through the recruitment process, which was really exciting for me. My next two roles I was headhunted for, so I didn't really do a lot of searching. But when I came to look at this role at Kinsta, I had a bunch of remote companies, probably about 20 or 25 bookmarked. And just every week I would just go through and keep an eye. Kinsta was one of them. I'd have a look at their careers page. And then when this role came up, I applied on there. So that's what's worked for me, for sure. But there are a bunch of great jobs boards and other resources that the people can use. We get a lot of our people we work remotely. So we get, I think I saw the statistics, about 20% of our people from there. So that's a really good board as well. And that was also one that I was keeping my eye on when I was looking for my remote job.
Yeah. And so I interviewed Matt from We Work Remotely 2 weeks ago. So they're head of operations. and he had a lot of interesting things to say about their vision and what they're doing. So do you have what would be the breakdown typically of the applications that you get per job board or per like how do you divide that into categories?
So we, I don't have all the stats in front of me, but I know we get about 50% of our hired candidates through our careers page. So it's actually people who are watching our careers page and applying for jobs through there. We Work Remotely was the next one, and then there are a couple of other sites that we use. I know Stack Overflow is one that we've been trying out and had some success with. But there are a bunch of different sites that we use.
Okay. And so from your experience being in HR and having obviously more remote experience now, what is the easiest on the back end to use? Is that your careers page, or is that going through job boards, or how does that really look on the back end?
So I think it varies quite a lot. I mean, our talent acquisition coordinator, Zophie, handles a lot of that. So she is like the best person to ask that question to. But I know that she finds LinkedIn a little challenging sometimes. And of course, our website is the best one. But I think LinkedIn have made some changes recently. So I expect that we'll probably see some ease of use in that.
But through your website, do you guys use an applicant tracking system?
We do. We use Workable.
Workable. Okay. And that's important for everybody to understand that's watching this, is that companies within their career pages often use an applicant tracking system that basically qualifies and ranks candidates and stores their data and all that sort of stuff. So when you're looking through the applicant tracking system, like what shows up on your end?
So a lot of applicant tracking systems will automatically filter out people who don't use certain keywords in their CVs. We actually don't like to take that approach. Sophie personally screens all the CVs that we have coming in. So for us, it just involves her spending a lot of time reading, really understanding the role, speaking with the hiring manager, understanding what they're looking for, and then taking the time to really look at each of those CVs. And we find that that's really helpful, because then we don't screen out candidates who could be good, but maybe don't have the best CV or don't understand the way applicant tracking systems work.
Okay. Well, how many? So that must mean that you're looking through a lot of resumes, though, right?
Yeah, we are, for sure. I think somebody said to me that for the position that I was recruited into, there were like 1,500 applicants.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then you have to have some sort of qualifying factors where you can get through resumes quickly. What would that be?
Well, she really just takes the time to read through them. I think that is the key thing. We spend a lot of time doing interviews as well, so that screens a lot of people out, and we have a really robust interview process. But really, it's just taking the time to read them.
Cool. And I do making a note to go into that interview process, because I think it's important to understand what people on your end are expecting from people that are coming in interviews. But to start, let's say that we started with you guys having an open role, which you have 10 open right now. So I'm gonna actually share. Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen here so people can see this. So there's quite a few open positions here on Kinsta. There's a marketing assistant, marketing specialist, a technical editor, JavaScript developer, WordPress support engineer, affiliate program coordinator, senior JavaScript developer trainer, a bunch of different stuff here. So go to kinsta.com careers to take a look at those different positions that are open right now. But what I'm curious is, can you take me through the whole process on your end? So start with me with, how do you determine that you need to hire, and then go all the way to maybe hiring someone, if that's possible.
Yeah, so it varies a little depending on the role and the department and what we're looking for. But initially, the job will open up. It could be the manager or the executive has identified a hiring need. And they will talk with various people to find out what that need looks like. Sometimes it's when someone leaves. We don't have a lot of people that leave at Kinsta, but when they do, we look at what the position should look like. You know, it might be that we need the exact same kind of profile, or it might be that going forward, actually, we would even benefit from making some changes there. So they spend a lot of time really firming up the job description to see what sort of profile we're looking for. Then we post it on our career site, on various other websites, and we have this influx of candidates often.
Couple of questions before you keep going. So at the beginning, when you're deciding the hiring need with the hiring manager, what's the discussion like to determine if you can keep the job in-house or keep those responsibilities in-house first? Is that something that you guys do?
In-house as
either promoting someone or maybe combining roles or figuring out how it is you can use talent that you already have.
Right, that's a great question, and a step that I missed out, because actually we do have a good process around that. We once the job description is finalized, we advertise it internally on our Slack channel. We give that role to our employees first, because one of the things that is really important is that we promote internally, and we give those opportunities to people that are here, and we guarantee that anybody who's interested in that job will get an interview. Not necessarily that they'll get the job for sure, but certainly that they'll have that interview.
And I think that's important for people to note on this call too, because if you have friends that work at remote companies, they're often going to know about positions prior. And that's really when you can stand to be in an advantage, because if it's in your internal system first, like in an internal Slack group, and say that you knew someone at Kinsta who's on the same team, and they're like, yeah, you know, it's not a good fit for me, but I have this friend that's actually looking right now and great fit for this role. How serious would you take that if someone were to say that to you?
Absolutely. We love to have referred candidates. We have a referral program where the Kinsta employee would get a nice little bonus if the person is successful for the role. And it's always nice to have somebody that can personally vouch for you, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's like the biggest. I mean, when I heard about your story of getting a role at Kinsta, it was through a referral, right? So maybe you can speak to that part for you, that process.
Yeah, so I think it can be a referral, or it can just be having some sort of connection with the company. So my connection with Kinsta is I didn't know anyone who actually worked there, but my husband did. And so through that connection, there was just a little bit of like, oh yeah, Kinsta, I was aware of you. My husband, 5-10 years ago, however long it was working with you guys. So it's just having that sort of little connection there. And you can, if you don't know anybody that works at the company, you can build that up by commenting on posts that they write, or anything like that, just building up some sort of connection.
So I'm so interested to hear your thoughts on this, because I have a lot of people who the most confusing part about building that relationship is the time between them seeing the job post, realizing they have no relationships, and then actually applying, but wanting to do so with at least one connection within the organization. How do you recommend you kind of balance the lack of relationship versus the seemingly inauthentic connection request to like talk to maybe you or talk to someone? Like, how do they bridge that gap and make it so that they're still valuable in your mind and not so desperate, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's quite difficult to do in the moment, right? When you see, we just opened this roll up for our marketing assistant, like it literally just opened today. And so if you see that and you think, oh, I'd like that job, it's really a relationship that's would have been best built over the weeks and months before. And that's why I think it's important, to be on platforms like LinkedIn or Instagram or wherever, or Twitter, and just responding and building those relationships already, so that when something does come up, then you already have a connection there. I wouldn't recommend putting off applying just so that you can try and build something. I think that maybe you might miss the boat, because we do have to shut roles once they get to quite high numbers. But you can go ahead and apply, and you can always make your mark, in the interview or in your cover letter. Zophie, our recruiter, is such a big fan of cover letters, and I am too. Like if you can really personalize those to get across that you've followed the company, that you've really read the job description, you understand what we're looking for. You don't have to meet 100% of the skills that we're looking for, but just that you're able to pull out your experience and show where you meet that match, or things that we've done that you're particularly excited about. I think that can also be another good way of standing out.
Yeah, and that's interesting. So tell me about the skills gap. So how, as far as a skills gap, like what's too much as far as not having the right skills or experience versus it's okay? Like, is there a line there that you can draw in any way?
I think it would depend a lot on the role and what sort of skills you're missing, because there are some things that are non-negotiable.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a tendency, and from some studies I've read, research has shown this is particularly prevalent amongst women, to not apply for jobs unless you meet 100% of the criteria.
Right,
So
right.
basically, I'm just saying, it doesn't matter if it's not 100%, apply anyway, and just try and really highlight those areas in which your skills would help us.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you talked a little bit about the time in which you get too many applications to consider anybody else. Like, what's that number for you guys?
Well, I don't know if there is a hard number, but I know that we are currently at about 600 applicants, I think, for our finance position. So we're looking for a finance assistant, and we just got a bunch of applicants very quickly. And I'm not sure the exact number that Zophie closed off the role, but I expect it would have been soon after that.
And then when, like, did you have a typical time frame? Is that like 2 weeks? Is that a week and a half? Or like how long is one of those up there typically?
So it depends on the hiring process, and if we know we have a lot of good candidates coming through the pipeline, we might close the role off early, but typically we would probably keep it up until the role is filled, and then we take it down.
Okay. But does it impact on your end? Does it impact you if someone, say, comes in the first couple days versus like the second week? Is that a big difference for you normally?
No, I don't think so. No, for sure not.
Okay, because one of the big concerns is that for clients that I work with and people that I talk to is if they're late to the game, if they're 2 weeks, 3 weeks into a job description or a job listing, that the company's already been interviewing people, they've already narrowed some people down. But maybe what you're saying is that, hey, if the listing's still up there, then you should apply no matter what.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. That's good to know, because I sometimes advise, like, if it's 2 or 3 weeks out, you still should, but we really want to be getting there within the first couple of days so that you're more easily noticed. Because if you're within the first maybe 10 applicants, 50 applicants, it's gonna be a lot easier to see your resume than if you're number 700. Okay, so some other things along the process. So you've identified the need around hiring. You've put up the listing internally. Haven't gotten anybody from that. So now you've put it on your website first. And is there a delay between the time that you put it on your website and then it goes onto a job board?
I think it happens pretty instantaneously. It's not like in the second, but pretty soon after.
Okay. And then how do you determine which job boards to use for particular roles?
So for some roles, we don't use any jobs boards at all. Our applicant tracking system pushes it out to a bunch of free jobs boards. And then there are some that we would actually use, like Stack Overflow. We work remotely if we feel that the role warrants it. But there are some that we don't use any paid advertising for. So we're quite interested in that regard. Yeah.
And what's the difference there between a role that you feel like would need the advertising versus not?
Roles that we think might be particularly difficult to fill or have a very specific skill set. So you'll know there's a lot of roles in the development and engineering world that people are just not really looking for jobs. They're not searching LinkedIn for roles. So we have to get them in places where people will see them, like Stack Overflow. There are some roles that are just very highly specialized. And so we feel that we much need a little bit more reach to get to those people.
Okay. And how much proactive outreach do you guys do to potential candidates versus having it out for candidates to apply?
Again, it depends a little bit on the role. So a lot of this is down to Zophie's judgment and what she feels she needs to do. So sometimes we reach out to candidates. It is generally quite inbound at Kinsta because, as I said, we do have a lot of people applying for our roles. It is quite competitive. But I know that she does also enlist the help of the hiring managers often. So when it does come to reaching out to people, it's not just the recruiters that do that. It's also the hiring managers that help out, and they often have a wider network in their field of expertise, of course, because they've been in that area for a while.
Okay. So this is interesting. I'd love to dive into this. Is like, what is the relationship between you, recruiters, and the hiring managers? Like, how does that all work?
It's a good relationship. It's very strong. We really like to think. I mean, Kinsta is such a nice place to work. I should just say that right off. Everyone is so nice. They're so friendly. So it's a really strong relationship. Sophie works really closely with them from the beginning to make sure she's really understanding the role. They craft the job descriptions. They are super active in the recruitment process, very responsive, interviewing people, as soon as they can, and really being really proactive in it. So I think the whole process works quite well. And I honestly don't really need to get involved very often. I've actually only been with Kinsta for a couple of months, but generally speaking, Sophie and the hiring managers just plow through these roles really quickly.
So their relationship then is tight at the hip as far as figuring out, hey, do we have the job listing right? Are these the type of candidates? And then is the recruiter actually doing some of the pre-screening interviews, or is the hiring manager doing those, or is that a combination of both of them?
The recruiter, usually.
Okay.
So Sophie will do pre-screening of the CVs and then the first round of interviews.
Okay, very cool. It's so fun to like hear some of the background and the inner workings, because I when I was at IBM, I actually got a taste of this during my first role, because I was helping our recruitment team recruit at my alma mater. So I would do some of the pre-screening and initial interviews and things like that. And then it's just interesting to see how this works within other organizations. Is it typical the way that you guys are doing it? Would you say that that's typical in comparison to the other jobs that you've had in HR before?
Yeah, it is. I think this is quite a common way for hiring. Sometimes the hiring managers will do pre-screenings as well, of CVs and of applicants. This is generally a pretty standard practice. Yeah.
And then what would you say, if there's anything about Kinsta that's really unique about the culture and the process that you've been able to be a part of and even start to implement in the first few months that you've been there?
So Kinsta's culture, like I said, is really fantastic. And one of the things that we've done recently is implement our engagement survey. So we send out an anonymous survey to all the people that work with us, and ask them about how they would rate Kinsta on a scale from 0 to 10, and what we do well and where we can improve. And the result was just phenomenal. It was really, really exciting to see. Have you heard of the ENPS score?
Yeah.
So we use that score here. So as you know, you can have a scale from minus 100 to plus 100, and anything in between. And generally speaking, a score of about sort of 20, 30 is considered pretty good. 50 is considered great. We actually got a score of 83, which is just phenomenal. Like it was really unheard of. It was fantastic. I was so pleased. If we took that as sort of like an average score, is like 9.4 out of 10. So people are really happy about working here, and they gave us some tips for improvement. And certainly there's some things that we've taken on board, and we've already finalizing our list of what actions we're going to take. And later this week, actually on Thursday or Friday, I'm going to send a little document to everyone saying, we heard you. This is what we heard. This is what we're doing. So I think there's certainly things that we're gonna change. But overall, just the area where things we were doing well was just great. And that was mainly around the people, just really nice, smart, kind people working there. So that was really good to hear.
And why is it that you think that the engagement survey was so positive?
I think there were two things. I think we hire really great people. I think our hiring process is really robust. We're quite picky. You heard we have a lot of applicants for our roles, and we really do take great care to find people who are not just technical experts, but actually really nice people too. And I think the second thing that we do really well here is we have a great executive team. They're fantastic. They're nice people. They're all aligned. They do just a great job of leading the company, and and managing their managers, and that really filters down, I think, to everything else. Yeah, they don't manage the country; they're not that good, but they manage the company well.
Close enough.
Yeah,
It's its own. Kinsta's its own country. That's what we've learned today out of everything.
Kinsta land. Yeah, I like it.
Okay, so, and you mentioned the robust hiring process. So, when you say that, what do you mean by that? Do you mean the interviews and getting to the hiring, or is that onboarding included, or how do you define that?
So I think there's different ways to define it. When I say it, I mean the whole interview process, and then the onboarding as well, because I think that's really important to get people aligned with the way we do things here. So you'll know the way that the remote first companies operate is a little different to when you're in an office, and I think being able to impart how that works with people is really important. And we're currently working on a project to look at our onboarding process and just make some tweaks. We're implementing Lessonly, which is a great e-learning platform. So we can use that during our onboarding process, which I think will be phenomenally helpful. And Evelyn, our training coordinator, is working really hard on that. So I think that whole process is really important.
Yeah. And Bailey had a comment here where she said, "Thanks for offering this. I didn't know about Kinsta before. I'll keep an eye on the job postings now." She's been applying for remote jobs for months, and she was asking if there's any other companies that personally review resumes instead of the ATS, and that she prefers the human approach. And I had a quick comment about this first before I want to let you jump in. What's been interesting about what you've been saying, Zaina, is like you've been talking about people within the organization with their names and how great they are and like how much they like down to the core of this, we're all humans. Whether or not you're going through the hiring process and applying online, the way to overcome any struggles with your job search process is to humanize as much as you can the parts that you can. So that's in building relationships, that's in finding companies that you align with culturally, that you have connections with, things like that. And I think the reality of what I've seen is there's a lot of companies that are not like Kinsta, that do not hand look at all of these resumes. And I don't blame them because they're getting, a ton. But what would you say to her have you seen any other companies that are doing it like you're doing it? That's the one part of the process that I was like, hey, is there something unique you guys are doing? Because I wanted to pull it out of you, but I think she's onto something here.
Yeah, it is quite unique, and it's something that I think is really special. They were already doing that at Kinsta before I joined, so I can't take any credit for it. But I know some of the previous companies that I've worked for have done that as well. Cubico is one. It's a startup in London, and I think I just think it's really important because you'll miss out on such great candidates. So it's nice. It's a nice thing to do, I think, for people, but it really makes business sense to do that if you want to find the best people.
Mm-hmm. What about replying? I mean, it seems like you spend a lot of time obviously looking at resumes. Does that mean that you reply to everybody that sends in an application?
We do. Yeah, we get back to everybody. I mean, I'm going to be honest. They don't get a personal reply in terms of like a personalized one. Of course, we use templates. But of course, I think it's important that you reply to people and just able to give them that closure, even if they don't get the job.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the tough things is that a lot of people are out there without a feedback loop. They're not getting a response, they don't have any closure, and they just have no idea how to get better. So when we think about what it is that you look for in a candidate personally, what do you think stands out for you?
Well, I think at a base level is being able to do your job well. You have to be able to answer the technical questions, and that's obviously always really important. But the sort of things that stand out for me are more aligned with our values. So we have a set of values here at Kinsta. We're currently going through a program process that I think is really important, where we just reevaluate those and check in that they're still relevant for us. And what my boss John is working on at the moment is working with Mark and our executive team to come up with a revised set of values, which I don't think will change probably very much from what we have at the moment. But the important thing is that he's pulling in feedback from all over the company and asking people what they think and what their opinions will be. So I think that's really important, just checking in that those values are still true. So, we're hoping once this list is revised to publish those on our website. And we will, and that's what we assess people on. And I think that's part of the reason, like we said before, why we have such a great culture, is because we think those values are really important, and they're not just something, all companies have values, but I think really aligning with those is important.
So how would I prove to you that I'm aligned to your values? Like, what would be an indicator for you that's like, oh wow, like you actually do fit?
Yeah, so we ask about them in the interview process. So I would think about some times when you've displayed those sort of values. So, for example, one of our values at the moment is around being the best at what you do. So think about times when you've been able to display that values, any awards that you've won or feedback that you've received, that sort of thing. Being kind is also another one that's really important to us. So, I think we all probably like to think of ourselves as kind people, but can you think of any examples of where you've really gone above and beyond? And it's really helpful. Just a little tip for interviewers: if you use a STAR technique when you're answering questions. So when I ask you about a time when you've been kind, it's really helpful if you think of that acronym. It's about the situation, the task, the action, and the result. So that makes it a lot easier for us to be able to evaluate your responses. And just check in if we're aligned, because for some people other things are important, other values, and it's important that we're on the same page in terms of what we're looking for.
So what was the A?
So action, what action you took, and then result. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good way to answer a question, is through the STAR technique.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm learning something as well. So that was during the interview process, but say it's before. How do I get that first interview? Like, what is it that I need to do to stand out?
Well, I think one thing that is really important for all applicants, and I know it's a real pain, but is to tailor your CV and your cover letter a little, to really think about what it is that aligns your experience with what we're looking for, and that really helps us be able to pull out those important skills and see if you're a good fit. And I think that's probably one of the main things, in addition to researching the company, like we said before. I think that's also something that really stands out too.
And you said it's a pain, but it's much less of a pain than job searching forever.
That is also true.
And wasting your time and not getting responses and all these things. So it's all relative, right? Like, you can either put in the work up front to increase your chances, or you can send applications out for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
It's just really, that's how it works. So I appreciate you sharing that. Okay, so we've gone into a lot of different things that people can do. What about you? Before Kinsta, you were consulting, right? For a certain amount of time, couple of years in between jobs. So how was that transition for you, going from jobs to consulting to then job again?
Yeah, so it was a funny one actually, because I'd worked at that point for about 8 years, always in like full-time employment, in HR, in small, medium-sized companies, but in larger companies. And I wanted to take a career break because I had 2 babies. So I have a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old. We also moved countries to Portugal. So I needed a job that would be super flexible and would allow me to take some time off from maternity leaves, but also, then when I wanted to go back to work, not be working full time, and also be in Portugal as opposed to London. And I don't speak Portuguese well at all. So I was really looking at, interacting mainly with international companies. So I thought I'd set up this freelancer, and I have my own website, zainaxavier.com. I was really excited and got my own business cards. But the transition was a little difficult for me, to be honest. My husband he's a CTO at Observador, but he also does a lot of consulting, and he regularly, every week, gets approached to do websites for people or consultant projects, different things. And I kind of just had this impression from him that that's what it would be like for me. So I got my website up and just waited for all these requests to roll in, and it didn't happen. And so I was lucky because, there was lots of other things going on in my personal life. So, there was no rush. But I remember sitting there at one point and thinking, why isn't anyone contacting me and asking for all this amazing expertise that I have? And that's when I realized, well, I have to go out and do, some sales and marketing of myself. So I went along to 2 events, gave out my business cards to the people who were sitting next to me. And I sort of thought, what, this is just not one of my strong suits. I'm not good at promoting myself and this sort of sales side. So that's when I sort of thought, what, I think I'm going to go back in-house and work in HR in a company. And I really love it, actually, as I was sort of going through this transition and thinking about being a consultant. And talking with companies, I did do some work. I was helping out with a startup here in Lisbon for about 5 months. I did some coaching. I was doing a coaching course as well. But as I was thinking about this new sort of life myself, I realized I actually just really love the security of working with a company and really getting to know people on a deeper level and helping them out for years at a time. So I'm really glad that I found my home at Kinsta. I think freelancing just wasn't suited for me.
Yeah, and I can imagine the stability also comes into play when you have kids, like you said. So having two boys at home. So tell me a little bit more about mom guilt and how it's been working remotely with a couple of boys.
Well, I think it's the working remotely bit that has really saved me. So, and I love it. And I think it's such an enabler for working moms to be able to have that flexibility that comes with remote work. And to be able to cut out that commute. I mean, when I was in London, I was commuting for some roles an hour each way, maybe 2 hours a day. And just being able to cut that time out of my day to spend with my kids has really been a lifesaver. So that's something that I really enjoy. But I don't know. I'm hoping the mum guilt goes away. I don't have any tips for how to get over it because I think I'm still suffering from it from a certain extent. But I was really inspired by the talk that you had with the guy from GitLab, the head of remote at GitLab.
Darren,
and he was talking about his son, and it was just really personal for him, I think. He was saying about how remote work has changed his life. And I was thinking to myself, that's true, and I feel that too. That's such a special thing that I'm able to do. And I think that women don't talk about it enough. I think, we're sort of a little nervous, and rightly so, when you look at some of these statistics that it will reflect badly on us. So we don't talk about it enough. And I wanted to mention it here because I think it's important that we do.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm wondering if is the guilt rooted in, I originally thought when you'd said that the guilt was rooted in your ability to work remotely and always be near your kids, but not be able to play with them or hang with them. It's always hey, go in the other room, whatever, that sort of thing. So what's the guilt actually stemming from?
Well, I think, and we call it mom guilt because that's the phrase for it, but I think fathers suffer from this too. It's more around, can you be both a good employee and a good parent? And I think that's the crux of it, really. And I firmly believe that you can, but I know that's not always a commonly held belief. So I know I'm super fortunate and probably don't even have the right, I guess, to talk about this because, we have a nanny who comes to our house and looks after our boys all day. And she's wonderful. We've got this amazing person. I know they're in great hands. So I get to come to this co-working space in Lisbon and just really be able to concentrate on my work. And I know a lot of people don't have that luxury. So I'm really fortunate. But I just still feel guilty when I leave them and these little boys, and they're so excited when I come home. And I know that I'm my best self when I'm working, and I need that in my life. It's something that's really important to me, my career. But sometimes there's a little tug on those heartstrings when I leave, and they're upset.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, and Chelsea, thank you for joining us. She had said thanks so much for the informative session. What was I going to ask you? Of course, I start my question and then I pull that up to confuse myself.
No worries.
What co-working space are you at?
It is Lisbon's oldest co-working space, Liberdade 229. I'll be completely transparent and say my husband runs it, which is one of the reasons probably that I personally love it, but I also think it's a great location.
Yeah. I've been to one. It's with the letter B. I forget what it's called though. When I was in Lisbon, I was there.
Mm, I don't
I
know. I don't
forgot.
know a lot of them. I just assumed I'd come to this one, so I didn't really research.
We got another question from Weston here. Thanks for the insider tips. Let's say you have an applicant with high potential, but you won't hire because they lack relevant experience. What can they do to get the relevant job experience that will make them a prime applicant next time?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the great things about Kinsta is that it's not all about the years of experience. You know, we're not big believers that you must have done X years before you can do a job. I think it's important that we recognize that people with high potential are really the ones that we want to be scooping up, because they're the stars of tomorrow. So I think that's something we do well here. But to answer the question, I think it's important to try and get that experience any way you can. You know, there are unpaid internships that are available. You could reach out to somebody in that department and ask if you could work on a project for them, for example, something like that. I know it's not ideal if you're working at the moment and what you need is paid employment, but that could be one route to getting that experience. It could also be doing something like setting up a hobby, a website or something in your free time, and blogging, or getting some experience that way. It really depends on the area that you're looking at, but that could also be something you do outside of work.
Yeah, and in Weston, I would also say, if you're in that position, it's really determining how much time you need to continue to spend towards the job search, and then how much time you can spend on developing skills. Because if there is a true technical experience gap, whereas you're trying to become a coder and you can't code, like that's a much bigger gap than if it's a soft skill that, you know, you can still apply to, you know, a customer support role, whereas you've been in sales before. Like there's much less of a dramatic jump. But I think figuring out like what's that experience gap, and then finding people within your network who, like Zaina said, you can work and help for free. And it doesn't have to be a huge amount of time each week. It could be a couple hours, and you can frame it as an internship or frame it as something where you're learning underneath somebody who's already doing something that you want to do, or just needs that extra assistance. But you know, you're both benefiting, and always get a recommendation or a referral from that person. Always get like a testimonial, and always, you know, make it in some form or fashion official in some way, so that you can put it on your resume, so you can put it on your LinkedIn. And yeah, like you said, no one wants to work for free, but the reality is, if you're looking to maintain or to build relationships, that's one of the ways to do it that not a lot of people are doing. And it helps you stand out. But on the other end of that, just because you're working for someone for free doesn't make their life easy. So you have to understand that if you're going to be working for someone for free, that you are being proactive in that environment. You're not just saying, hey, I can work for free, just let me know what you want me to do. It's like, no. You have to have the proactivity to say, these are the things that I bring to the table. Here's the projects that I can help with. Here's the timeline that we're working with. I generally like a 3-month timeline, a quarter, to kind of figure things out. 3 months, like a couple, like 5 hours a week, whatever that is. And then, yeah, just figuring out like how do we get those additional kind of experiences, and maybe it's even freelance. And start with your current network. Start with people you already know, because they're more likely to be patient with you and also say yes. So those are my tips there.
Yeah, I think they're good ideas for sure.
And Weston thanks us there, which is great. And I'm curious to know, Zaina, as one of my last few questions here, what's been your biggest contribution so far to Kinsta? I know you've been there for a few months, but what do you think that you've really brought to the team?
So it's a great team. It's a really wonderful team. And I'm so excited to be there. I think probably what my contribution is more at a strategic level. So things are running well at Kinsta. You've seen from the engagement survey, people are happy. That's not because I joined, you know, they were happy already. But I think as we grow and as we get bigger, we just have to put a little bit of strategy around a lot of things. To make sure that they continue to be great as we get bigger. So the values project that John is working on will be a big part of that. We put a whole strategy around diversity and inclusion over the last couple of months. So that is also something that I think will be really beneficial to Kinsta. Things like even just doing these surveys so that we can get feedback, and doing them every 4 months so that we're regularly checking in with people and acting on the results. I think is really important. So it's more around the strategic side of HR, I think.
Yeah, and if anybody else has any more questions for Zaina, feel free to pop them in the comments. When you think of your particular strength within strategy, like where do you fit within that framework? Like what's your biggest strength in directing a strategy?
So I think one of the most difficult things about HR, and probably about a lot of teams as well, but is thinking about where to direct your time. So I inform a lot of the decisions around what we'll be doing over the next months and years around the feedback that I'm getting from the engagement survey that I mentioned, around talking to my team and seeing where their pain points are and what pressures they see coming up over the next months, and also talking to other stakeholders in the business and asking them what they think we could be doing better on. So gathering all that information and then prioritizing the areas we could be working on, I think, is probably one of the areas that I really enjoy.
Has any of those, or I should say, what type of feedback has surprised you so far?
What type of feedback has surprised me so far? I don't think there was really anything in this engagement survey that surprised me very much. I was expecting to see pay and benefits as something. So I've run these surveys in all the companies that I've worked for, and pay and benefits are always something that people say we can improve because people always want more pay and more benefits. Yeah. But at Kinsta, that was actually, those responses were not as high. People did comment on it, and it is something we're going to work on. But it was a very low percentage of the overall comments that people made. So I was kind of surprised at that because, just because it's something that usually companies don't score as well
on. And you mentioned pay. So like, I don't know what you're able to share with us as far as your guys' policies, but I see different types of policies across the board as far as teams that are distributed and have people all over the world. Are you able to share like how you guys structure compensation based on people living in different places?
Well, it depends a lot on the person, the location, and the team that they're in. I mean, there are some fantastic ideas out there. I think I was reading an article, was it Basecamp, that pay everyone within like the 10% of the San Francisco market. I was reading, and lots of different companies. I love GitLab. They have their online salary calculator, which when I was job hunting, I personally found really helpful. So there are loads of different strategies, and I think nobody really has the right answer when it comes to this sort of question, and companies all do it differently, and the right answer will be different for different companies. But I think there are certainly some really good ideas out there, and very progressive ideas around how companies should structure pay.
Yeah, I just think that's interesting because I work with people that some are from regions that pay obviously well below San Francisco or even most of America, but they want to travel maybe to European countries or even to the US, and it's like, oh, I can't do that on the salary that I'm going to be making for this company. So I just always get curious of how companies come to that conclusion of how they're able to provide a certain lifestyle for people.
Yeah, and I think it's such an interesting one because the argument behind it, I think, is that their contribution to the company is the same, whatever location they live in, and so their pay should be the same. And I agree with that in principle, but I can't help but wonder, and probably there's an answer out there, I just haven't found it yet, but I can't help but wonder if that's fair, because what we're also really talking about is what people's leftover pay is after they take it. And so if someone lives in San Francisco or London or Berlin, where the rates are so much higher, they're not going to have the same sort of lifestyle as somebody living in Romania or Hungary or places where it's much lower. So it does feel also a little bit unfair to me. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I would love to hear anything you think about that area.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, so I am someone who knows firsthand how much it costs to live in places like that, and it can be very frustrating to work really hard to make good money and then see all of it go just in your rent check. But I also chose a lot of times to live there and live in Portland, Oregon, live in Boston, Massachusetts, places that had high rates. And really, I had a choice for the majority of my career of where I lived because of my remote status. So eventually I chose Mexico mostly because of cost of living, being near the beach, like quality of lifestyle, the language, like all the things that took me to Mexico were centralized around the lifestyle that I could build for what I was making compensation wise. And even when I was a full-time remote employee, I had lived in mostly Latin America, where in Colombia, Chile, Peru, Mexico all have significantly lower cost of living. So it's a hard question to answer. I don't think there's one right or wrong answer. I just wonder how people, like one of the people that I'm working with who wants a specific lifestyle and doesn't want to live where she's from, which is a country in Southeast Asia. She doesn't want to live there. She can't, companies don't offer to pay her to give her the ability to travel either. So it's just kind of a confusing situation.
Yeah, it's a difficult one for sure. But I love the idea that salaries are transparent as well. But I think the most important thing is that they're fair. That you're following a salary approach consistently and you're paying people doing the same job at the same level, maybe in the same location, at the same rates, and that you're competitive externally. So
yeah. Well, great. I think this has been awesome. It's been enlightening for me. It's been enlightening for a lot of people who've been able to watch. Is there anything else that you'd have to say to job seekers about Kinsta or about, how they should conduct their search, or anything that's really stood out to you?
No, I think you did a great job of covering it all. Just keep an eye on our careers page. We have a lot of great roles coming up as well. And hopefully I'll be working with you soon.
Awesome. And wait, it looks like we got one question here at the bell. Thank you so much. So glad to learn a ton. Big candidate. Is there anything either you recommend for someone who's just starting out their job search other than what's been said? And I think we kind of covered that. Montana, I also have a ton of other interviews I've done with additional information about what to do in your remote job search. I've got other stuff on theremotejobcoach.com, so check that out. Check out kinsta.com as well. And thanks everybody for tuning in this week. Keep wandering. You're not lost.